In the summer of 2019, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Hollis decided to sell the farmhouse her grandfather had built in 1887 outside of Lubbock, Texas. The old place had been in the family for 4 generations, and before the real estate agent could walk through, Margaret's son decided to do one last sweep of the property. He was checking for structural issues under the back porch when he noticed something strange. The wooden floorboards in the corner of the old root cellar sounded hollow. Not just a little hollow, completely hollow. He pried up 3 planks, shone his flashlight into the gap, and saw stone steps descending into absolute darkness. Nobody in the family had ever known there was anything down there. What they found over the next 3 days would change everything they thought they knew about their own history, and about the people who had lived and died on that land long before their grandfather ever broke ground. There were 25 objects in that basement, and every single one of them tells a story that most history books forgot to write down. Before we get to all of them, I need to warn you that number 7 on this list was so controversial that a local museum refused to display it, and the object at number 1 hasn't been fully explained to this day. If you're new here, subscribe now so you don't miss the follow-up video where we go even deeper into what was hidden in that basement. And now, let's start from the beginning. Number 25 is where this story gets strange. Number 25 was a rusted iron tobacco tin, the kind that would have sat on a general store counter in the 1880s. At first glance, it seemed like nothing, just a corroded box you might find at any antique market across Texas. But when Margaret's son pried it open with a flathead screwdriver, he found it packed with folded scraps of paper, each one covered in tiny handwritten script. They were receipts, not regular receipts for goods or supplies, but receipts for human beings. Contracts of sale, written in the clear, careful hand of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The dates ranged from 1853 to 1861, placing them squarely in the period before the Civil War, and the names on those slips of paper were people who had been bought and sold on Texas soil. The tin had been hidden deliberately, tucked into a false bottom space beneath the stone stairs. Someone had wanted these records preserved. Whether that was to remember the injustice or to protect themselves from accusations was a question the family would wrestle with for months. Number 24 was a cavalry saber in a leather scabbard, and the leather was so well preserved that conservators who later examined it were genuinely surprised. The blade bore a mark that matched the production stamp used by the Confederate States Armory in 1862. The grip had been rewrapped at some point, probably decades after the original owner carried it, and someone had carved 3 small crosses into the pommel with a knife. The saber showed no signs of combat damage, which historians found interesting. A weapon that was kept but never used, hidden underground rather than displayed, tells a very different story than a war trophy hanging over a fireplace. Number 23 was a glass medicine bottle, still sealed with its original wax stopper, containing a dark amber liquid that smelled faintly of licorice and something sharper underneath, when the seal was finally broken by a chemist at Texas Tech University. The label, though faded, was still legible. Dr. Bartholomew's Nerve and Blood Tonic, New Orleans, Louisiana, 1874. Analysis of the liquid found it to contain traces of ethanol, quinine, and a compound consistent with laudanum, which was an opium derivative widely used throughout the 19th century as a general remedy for everything from coughs to grief. The fact that it was sealed and preserved suggested it had never been opened. Someone had kept it for a reason they never acted on. Number 22 was a wooden box containing 7 glass photographic plates, the kind used in wet collodion photography in the mid to late 1800s. 6 of the plates showed nothing remarkable: a farmhouse under construction, a woman in formal dress standing in front of a fence, 2 men with horses. But the 7th plate, when held up to light, showed a group of approximately 30 people standing in front of what appeared to be a wooden structure with a bell tower. Several of the people in the image appear to be wearing chains. The image has since been analyzed by historians at 3 separate universities, and the consensus is that it depicts a scene from the period of Reconstruction, likely 1867 or 1868. Number 21 was a hand-stitched quilt folded into a cedar chest no larger than a shoebox. The quilt was made from dozens of different fabric scraps, each one a different pattern and texture, and textile historians who examined it recognized something remarkable. Several of the patterns embedded in the quilt's design corresponded to patterns documented as part of what some researchers call the Underground Railroad Quilt Code, a disputed but compelling theory suggesting that quilts were used to communicate routes and safe houses to people escaping slavery. The debate over whether the quilt code was real is ongoing among historians, but the presence of this quilt in a sealed underground basement on a Texas farm added one more piece of physical evidence to a theory that many dismissed as folklore. Number 20 was a land deed, handwritten on vellum, for a parcel of 640 acres in what is now Lubbock County. The deed was signed in 1871 by a man named Ezekiel Pruitt, but the remarkable thing was a second signature below his, a woman's name, written in a different hand, which legal historians identified as highly unusual for the period since women in Texas could not legally own property in their own names until decades later. The deed had been notarized by a justice of the peace whose name matched records from a Reconstruction-era county that no longer exists, having been absorbed into surrounding counties in 1876. Number 19 was a set of surveying tools, a brass compass, a measuring chain, and a small leather notebook filled with survey notations. The tools were in remarkable condition, and the notebook entries spanned several years in the 1880s. What made these significant was that the survey lines recorded in the notebook did not match any officially recorded property boundaries in the county records. Someone had been surveying land in secret, or recording boundaries that the official system refused to recognize. Several entries in the notebook were written in a cipher that has not yet been fully decoded. Number 18 was a Bible, King James Version, printed in Philadelphia in 1843. The inside cover had been used as a family record, as was common in the period, with births, deaths, and marriages recorded in several different hands across multiple decades. But tucked between the pages of Exodus were 12 pressed wildflowers and a folded note that read, in full, "She came through on the third Thursday. God willing, she reached the river." Nothing else. No name, no date, no signature. Just that single sentence and 12 dried flowers from the Texas plains. If you've been watching this far, I want to ask you something. Did your family ever have a place that kept secrets? Leave a comment below and tell me what you think about what was hidden in this basement, because we're just getting to the objects that really shook the Hollis family to its core. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, so you don't miss what comes next. Number 17 was a leather saddlebag containing 43 silver coins, most of them Spanish reals dating from the late 18th century, with several Mexican pesos from the 1820s mixed in. The collection suggested someone with connections to the pre-annexation economy of Texas, when the region was still part of Mexico, and Spanish colonial currency still circulated widely in the border economy. The coins showed wear consistent with actual use rather than collection, meaning someone had spent time in an economy where this currency was common before bringing it north into what became American territory after 1845. Number 16 was a tin canteen with a bullet hole through one side. The canteen was stamped with a unit designation that matched records for a Buffalo Soldiers Regiment, the nickname given to the African-American cavalry units that served in the post-Civil War Frontier Army. The hole had not been repaired, suggesting whoever owned it either survived the shot that struck the canteen, or the canteen was kept as a memorial by someone else. A faded name scratched into the bottom with a sharp implement read, C. Washington. Number 15 was a wooden crate containing 12 glass mason jars, each one sealed and filled with seeds. The seeds were perfectly preserved by the dry underground conditions, and agricultural scientists at Texas A&M who examined samples identified species that included a variety of Cherokee corn, not commercially available since the early 20th century, a strain of black-eyed pea associated with seed-saving traditions in West African and African American foodways, and a type of drought-resistant wheat that had been largely displaced by commercial varieties by 1920. Someone had been preserving genetic diversity in a basement in West Texas while the world above moved toward monoculture. Number 14 was a mechanical music box, Swiss-made, dating to approximately 1875 based on the mechanism style. The box was in working condition and played a melody that took musicologists several weeks to identify. It turned out to be a variation on a hymn that was common in frontier Methodist churches in the 1870s and 1880s. The box had been wrapped in oilcloth and placed inside a second wooden box, suggesting someone had taken care to protect it through what they knew might be a long time in storage. Number 13 was a ledger book, the kind used by merchants and tradespeople, covering the years from 1888 to 1903. The entries recorded transactions for what appeared to be a small school, payments for chalk, paper, primers, and wood for a stove, along with names that appeared regularly as students and occasional notes about their progress. The school was never officially registered with any county authority. It was, by every indication, a secret school, operating underground in the literal and figurative sense, providing education to children who the official school system of Lubbock County was refusing to serve. Cross-referencing the names with county records from the period, researchers identified most of the students as the children of black families who had been systematically excluded from the public schools of the era. Subscribe to this channel if you want to know more about the forgotten histories hiding beneath American soil, because this list goes somewhere you won't expect. Number 12 was a collection of arrowheads and stone tools, 14 pieces in total, carefully wrapped in deer hide and tied with leather cord. The pieces were identified by archaeologists as being consistent with Comanche craftsmanship from the period between roughly 1840 and 1870, before the final displacement of Comanche bands from the Texas plains in the Red River War of 1874. The care with which the pieces had been wrapped and stored suggested they were not trophies taken from a battle but items received, traded, or given as gifts by someone who understood their significance. Number 11 was a hand-drawn map on heavy paper, approximately 18 by 24 inches, showing a portion of the Texas Panhandle in extraordinary detail. The map was not oriented with north at the top. It was drawn from a perspective that scholars of Comanche geography recognized as consistent with the oral mapping traditions of the Southern Plains, where orientation was determined by the direction of water flow rather than cardinal points. The map identified springs, seasonal camps, hunting territories, and routes in a system that had no equivalent in any official American survey of the region. Number 10 was a doctor's bag, black leather, containing instruments dated by style to the 1890s. The bag held a stethoscope, several lancets, a mortar and pestle still stained with dark residue, glass vials with hand-labeled contents including quinine sulfate and calomel, and a notebook in which someone had recorded patient observations in careful clinical language. The notebook covered a period of 8 years and recorded treatments for approximately 200 individuals, most identified only by initials. The handwriting changed partway through the notebook, suggesting the bag and its records had passed from one practitioner to another. Number 9 was a collection of 41 letters tied with a strip of cotton fabric, all addressed to the same person, a woman named Clara, at a general delivery address in Lubbock, and all unsent. The letters were written across a span of decades, from the 1890s to the 1930s, in a voice of unmistakable intimacy. They were love letters, and they were remarkable not only for their tenderness, but for their careful avoidance of any identifying information about the writer. Every one of them was signed the same way. Yours, always, in the sight of God and no other. No name, no initial, just that phrase, repeated across 40 years of hidden feeling. Number 8 was a collection of newspaper clippings, carefully preserved in a leather folder, all of them reporting on a single event, the Slocum Massacre of 1910, in which a white mob in Anderson County, Texas, killed an undetermined number of black residents over the course of several days. Official records at the time listed 8 dead, but historians have long suspected the actual number was far higher. The clippings in the basement folder included several from black-owned newspapers in Houston and Dallas that ran far more detailed accounts than the white press, and handwritten notes in the margins of several clippings recorded names and details that did not appear in any published source. Someone had been keeping a more complete record than history allowed. Number 7 was the object that divided the family most sharply. It was a set of handwritten documents in Spanish, dated 1836, that appeared to be a property claim for the land that would eventually become the Hollis family farm. The documents listed an owner whose name matched records for a Mexican land grant that had never been formally extinguished when Texas achieved independence. A Texas land law attorney who examined the documents told the family that while the claim was almost certainly not legally actionable in any practical sense after nearly 2 centuries, the documents represented evidence that the land had been taken from its recognized owner without compensation or due process at the moment of Texas annexation. A dispossession the official records simply recorded as a transfer of title. A local museum that had expressed interest in the find declined to display this particular document after a member of its board objected. Number 6 was a tin box containing a complete set of Freedmen's Bureau records for a freedman named Thomas Henry Akers, including his certificate of freedom issued in 1865, his marriage record, birth records for 3 children, and a contract for labor dated 1866. What made the documents remarkable was the labor contract, which historians of Reconstruction identified as an example of a coercive arrangement that amounted to a legally documented form of peonage, freedom on paper, bondage in practice. Tucked behind the documents was a photograph of a man in his Sunday clothes, looking directly into the camera with an expression that has been described by everyone who has seen it as a man who knew exactly what he was doing when he sat for that portrait. Number 5 was a glass jar containing a single human tooth, wrapped in a piece of red cloth with a folded slip of paper that read only, "For May. She never came back." The tooth had been analyzed and determined to be from an adult female, likely in her 20s or 30s based on wear patterns. No May matching any reasonable profile from the era could be identified in county records, which itself told a story. A person who left no trace in official documents, who existed only in this one act of preservation. A jar of grief hidden underground for more than a century. Number 4 was a set of oil paintings, 3 of them, small enough to have been painted for travel, on wooden boards rather than canvas. The paintings depicted scenes of the Texas landscape, a river crossing, a stand of cottonwood trees, a night sky over open plains, and the style was identified by art historians as consistent with work produced by German immigrant artists who came to Texas in significant numbers between 1845 and 1860. One of the paintings had a date scratched into the back in pencil, 1848, and below the date, a single German word, Heimweh, homesickness. Number 3 was a wooden box containing a complete set of tools for a cobbler, lasts, awls, hammers, edge trimmers, and thread, along with a small order book recording custom shoe orders going back to 1891. The orders listed names, measurements, and prices paid. What historians found extraordinary was the geographic spread of the customers. They came from distances of 40 and 50 miles, which for the 1890s represented a full day's journey each way. Someone was making shoes worth a 2-day round trip to obtain, which suggested a craftsman of rare skill, serving a community that had no other access to quality work. The last entry in the order book was dated March 1918, and the customer was listed as the boy before he leaves, with a size and a note. No charge. Number 2 was a leather-bound journal, 312 pages, covering the years 1901 through 1936. The journal belonged to a woman who identified herself only by the initials E.H., and it constituted one of the most complete first-hand accounts of everyday life in rural West Texas ever discovered. E.H. wrote every day, sometimes only a sentence and sometimes several pages, and she wrote with a precision and clarity that historians described as remarkable. She recorded weather, harvests, deaths, births, feuds, kindnesses, the price of cotton, the behavior of her neighbors, the passage of seasons, and her own inner life with an unflinching honesty that seemed to assume no one would ever read what she wrote. She recorded the death of a child in 3 sentences. She recorded a night when she walked out into the field alone and stayed until morning in 17. Whoever E.H. was, she was a writer who wrote only for herself, in a basement, for 35 years. And now we reach number 1, the object that no one in the Hollis family expected, the thing that has still not been completely explained, and the reason that archaeologists, historians, linguists, and at least one expert in pre-Columbian material culture have all made the trip to West Texas to look at what was hidden deepest in that basement beneath the old farmhouse. Number 1 was a clay tablet, approximately 8 inches by 10 inches, fired and hardened, covered on one face with incised markings. The tablet was found wrapped in oilcloth inside a sealed iron box, beneath a layer of sand that appeared to have been placed there deliberately. The markings were not immediately recognized as any known writing system. The tablet was dated by thermoluminescence analysis to between 1200 and 1400 CE, placing its creation centuries before European contact with the Americas. A specialist in Mississippian culture iconography identified several of the symbols as potentially related to the Southeastern ceremonial complex, a network of shared religious and artistic traditions that connected indigenous cultures across a vast region of North America between roughly 800 and 1600 CE. How a tablet of this type ended up in a sealed iron box in a basement in West Texas is a question that remains genuinely open. There are theories that it was traded across the plains, that it was collected by someone who understood its significance, that it was brought to the region by indigenous people displaced by the violence of the 19th century, and preserved by someone who knew it needed to be protected. None of these theories has been definitively confirmed. What has been confirmed is that the tablet is real, that it is old, and that someone, at some point in the history of that farm, decided it was worth protecting at the cost of concealing it from the world. That basement beneath the Hollis farm held 25 objects across more than 5 centuries of American history. It held grief and love and injustice and beauty and secrets that families carry for generations without knowing what they are carrying. It held evidence that the official version of history leaves enormous things out, not by accident, but by design. Every single one of those objects was placed there by a human being who wanted something to survive. They wanted a record to exist. They wanted someone, someday, to find it and understand. Here's my question for you, and I want you to answer it in the comments right now. If you found a hidden room beneath your family's land, and inside it was a single object that told the true story of your family's past, what do you think that object would be? The real answers to questions like that are exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to explore. And one more thing before you go. If any part of this story moved you, share it with one person who you think deserves to know that history is not finished, that the past is still speaking, and that sometimes all it takes is a hollow sound beneath the floorboards to change everything you thought you knew.